We're in the middle of election season. It is partisan heaven, right? Because now is when being partisan is very much rewarded, not only by social media clicks, but theoretically, by winning the election itself. So they really want to get close to that money printer. They really want to get close to Washington, D.C. So they're spending more money than ever to be able to influence that political process. And that is actually what's causing some of the biggest divide problems in our country. I think under a Trump administration, it at least appears as if so that the GOP and Trump and the Republicans would at bare minimum, not attack Bitcoin, right? And that is a huge improvement over the Biden administration. The way that we believe that we can be effective for that is to go state by state and start getting states to begin the process of adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet.
This podcast is entertainment, not financial, tax, or legal advice. Views expressed represent statements of the speaker in their individual capacity, do not represent the views of Unchained, and should not be considered investment advice. Speakers often have personal, family, or business connections to Unchained, which may include direct financial benefits. Please see our disclosure at unchained.com/podcast.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Bitcoin Frontier podcast. This week we have on Dennis Porter. Dennis, welcome.
Joe, glad to be back, ready to have our election time conversation.
I love it. Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time to jump on this real quick, and I'm excited to chat. So, as you mentioned, we're coming up on the U.S. presidential election. Can you maybe break down how each politician or political party generally thinks about Bitcoin and what their similarities might be and maybe what their differences might be?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you said political parties, right? Because there is so much going on under the surface between both of these groups. I mean, we've clearly seen that Republicans have taken a very strong lead on the technology. I'm excited to see leaders like Senator Lummis pushing for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. I'm also very proud of the work that we've been able to accomplish at Satoshi Action, where we have been able to pass pro-Bitcoin laws in 4 different states. And all of those states are led by Republicans. They're all, led by governors who are part of the GOP. And so we have certainly seen, as our work has continued forward and as others have seen across the space, that Republicans very much are out on the lead on this thing. But we are seeing a lot of changes. Some might say in response to the Republicans, but definitely seeing a lot of changes on the left with Democrats, left-hand side of the aisle, where they're starting to find their own bearings with how they view this technology and the things that they appreciate about it. Typically, I would say that you're going to see, as time goes on, that both groups, both parties, and everybody in between as well, they're going to become pro-Bitcoin, right? They're going to become, or maybe writ large, pro-digital asset. But it's really going to come down to, over the next 4 to 8 years, maybe the next decade will be defined by how these parties and how these groups decide to do Bitcoin, so to speak, right? I've been saying this for some time now. I said we need to get away from an era where we are fighting over whether or not we should do Bitcoin and enter an era where we are battling over how we implement this technology, how we adopt Bitcoin, how we mine Bitcoin, right? That's going to be an incredibly big debate amongst Republicans and Democrats. For obvious reasons, energy is very politicized. We have Democrats who pursue a clean energy approach, and we have Republicans who are more of all of the above. And they're going to want to see different types of policies be implemented based on that worldview, based on that perspective. So that's the kind of battles that I want to see, though, right? That's a great battle, because either way, Bitcoin's winning in that situation. But both parties certainly are taking a positive look towards this space. Republicans are way out in front. The conversations that I'm having behind the scenes with Democrats, which is going to come to, I think, the public space. A lot of people say, well, one of these Democrats that you speak about are going to become more public. And certainly there will be some news coming out about that, hopefully soon. Bare minimum, by the month of January, we'll really start to see these things develop. In fact, I probably could say right now, this is pre-recorded, so by the time this comes out, which will be soon, there is going to be headway made in the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania is where we are trying to pass a bill to protect Bitcoin. And in committee, Democrats voted in favor of that bill. So I often find that a lot of times there is this disparity between how people view the two parties. I think it has a lot to do with the leadership, right? That's very common. That's very normal and to be expected. Republican leadership has really gone out on a far ahead on this issue, but Democrat leadership has not. That, I would say, is the one area of disparity between the two groups. Trump, the GOP party platform even has it in there. You've got the minority leader. You've got the majority leader. You've also got the whip Tom Emmer, who has been very supportive of this industry. So you see this like leadership move in the Republican Party. We have yet to see that on the Democrat side of the aisle. There hasn't been a big leadership push, but I think this election is really driving the conversation towards a direction where Democrats feel like they have to take a position on the technology. And we have seen some positive movements from the Harris campaign. I would love to see way more, of course. I don't think it's enough. But I'm also in the camp where I don't really ever believe anything is enough. I don't believe that lip service is ever enough. We need to have both sides of the aisle, not only giving lip service, but putting forward ideas, putting forward policy solutions, and then actually passing those policy solutions into law.
Is there any difference between Kamala and Biden on their how they're looking at Bitcoin and the crypto industry broadly? Like, is she kind of coming closer to, being more Bitcoin friendly or no?
Yeah, I mean, listen, Kamala Harris and the folks that are a part of her campaign are certainly making a decisive effort to be able to speak to this audience. I said earlier, I don't think it's enough. I think we want to see way, way more. And certainly Republicans are way out on the lead when it comes to talking about this issue and when it comes to being friendly towards Bitcoin. But we have seen the Harris campaign make overtures to the space, everything from making statements to protect the cryptocurrency industry writ large, to signals that she is going to be replacing Gary Gensler. Now, I'd like to see more than that. I don't want to just see, some of these bad characters be taken out of the space like Gary Gensler. I want to see us go on the offense. I want to see us make very positive movements in the realm of Bitcoin and digital assets for the United States. We also need to be, really careful when we move forward as far as policy is concerned. And this is the one thing I would give, Democrats a tip of the hat to, which is that they tend to be a lot more thoughtful around consumer protection and making sure that policies are designed that not only enhance innovation and protect innovation, but also make sure that we protect consumers. And I think that's very much in alignment with Bitcoin. Bitcoin was very much designed to protect users. It's got a lot of what I would call regulations in the actual Bitcoin code itself. We regulate the block size, we regulate the amount of Bitcoin that can be in existence. Those are highly regulated, in fact. And, the reason we do that is to protect decentralization, because we want to make sure that users across the world are able to run a node. We also want to make sure that we protect the supply of Bitcoin. We don't want anyone to have control over the issuance of Bitcoin. We don't want anyone to have the ability to debase or inflate the currency that we use. And that is ultimately a protection for the users. It is a protections for consumers, right? So in a way, I think Democrats will eventually come to really appreciate Bitcoin and the fact that it is so good at protecting its users that it almost doesn't really need a lot of the traditional protections, consumer protections that you might see in a traditional asset class, because it is so transparent. It is so available for anyone to monitor. Right now, anyone can go get a node. They can spend about $100 and they can download the entire blockchain and they can see every single transaction. It's extremely transparent. And to me, that is once that message is shared appropriately with Democrats, I think they're going to really go, oh, wow, I didn't even realize that Bitcoin is doing such a good job all on its own, very much separate from crypto, doing something all on its own where it is ensuring that consumers are protected. So I do believe that as time goes on, that is a message that'll resonate with folks that are outside the Republican Party. It's a message that I've shared with Democrats before, and every time I share it, they sort of kind of like, oh, I had no idea. And also there's this other thing too, which I think is really interesting that you're going to see take place. Democrats really care about financial inclusion. They really care about banking the unbanked. And Bitcoin, as you know, and as anyone else that's probably watching this show knows, is one of the most financially inclusive technologies on the planet. It doesn't matter what your sex, race, gender, sexual orientation, religious beliefs, political beliefs. It doesn't matter. Bitcoin simply cannot discriminate. And because it's a money that you can't discriminate with, I believe that that's a message that'll resonate with a lot with Democrats. And it's something that we're going to talk a lot more about going into January when we see some of the policies that we're going to be getting introduced at the state level by Democrats.
Yeah, this is something that I think has been said before, where people will say that Bitcoin is like a very American idea where it's like pro-freedom and open opportunity for everyone. Do you agree with that idea? And do you think that that's relevant like today?
Absolutely. Absolutely believe that the Bitcoin is an open opportunity for anybody to take place in, and that it provides freedom for those that use the technology. It enables people to be a part of the digital economy in a way that doesn't enforce any sort of the traditional third-party rules, right? Like if you sign up for Bitcoin, you don't have to share all your personal data. You don't have to have an address. You don't have to share anything about yourself that might limit your ability to have access to the technology. And then also you can access Bitcoin anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter what borders you're in. Bitcoin is available to you. And for those people that have been, left out of the system in the past, people that are not able to participate in programs like financial tools that we have today, this is a very, very powerful technology, and it's really made available. And I think this is a point that I want to drive home. It's something that I'm starting to talk a lot more about, and I'm going to be doing a talk about it here soon in Lugano. Is that in order for us to have these freedoms, they need to be defended. We have them natural born, right? There's this idea that our rights are naturally born to us, and that is true. We should have the freedom to speak. We should have the freedom to vote. We should have the freedom to participate in government. But in order for them to truly be defended, they need to be defended in law. And that's why things like the U.S. Constitution are so important. That's why things like the consensus rules in Bitcoin are so important, because those rules, they protect us from government oversight. They protect us from the financial abuses that take place within the current monetary system.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Do you think it's important for there to be bipartisan support for Bitcoin? And if so, why is that a good approach for the community in general?
Absolutely. Listen, at the end of the day, Bitcoin just is bipartisan or nonpartisan, right? It is just a protocol. It is just a technology. It is not for the left or for the right. It is not for Republicans or for Democrats. It is for anybody who cares about freedom. It is for anybody that cares about financial inclusivity. It is for anybody that wants to remove the power of the printing press from the federal government, or at least giving you the option. You can opt out, right? I'm not saying that we're going to go to a world soon where there just doesn't exist any sort of fiat money. I think fiat money will survive for some period of time, maybe forever, theoretically, especially because Bitcoin as a technology, once fully appreciated and adopted, will become this very perfect mirror of what's happening with fiat currencies. Right now, there's no checks and balances on fiat currencies, but Bitcoin is a true check and balance on the debasement of fiat currency. So now that there's an actual check and balance, well, maybe then government officials will become more responsible with the way that they utilize their national currency, because they know that if they abuse that national currency, that there's an easy way for people to offload into Bitcoin. So in a way, there's a world where Bitcoin maybe doesn't get rid of fiat currencies, but it just makes fiat currencies more responsible, because there is this true transparency of what's going on the other side of an asset class that kind of perfectly mirrors that type of debasement. But I do believe that Bitcoin very much is a bipartisan, or people will yell at me and say nonpartisan. I use them interchangeably. Ultimately, when I say bipartisan, I mean that is bring both sides together, really all sides together to fight for the technology. And I see this on the ground. People will say that I don't know what I'm talking about, that Democrats hate Bitcoin and that Republicans are the party of freedom. Listen, I love it. I grew up in a Republican family. I grew up extremely conservative. My parents are missionaries. They've been missionaries for almost 20 years now. They're currently missionaries in the country of El Salvador. They've been there for 15 years. They're still very conservative. So I appreciate the perspective that people have. I was raised listening to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity on talk radio almost every single day of my life growing up. So I totally agree that Bitcoin is in alignment with Republican values and with conservative values. But I've also lived in the city of Portland, Oregon for the last 15 years plus. And I have a lot of progressive friends, a lot of liberal friends. And they also, and I see alongside them, that how Bitcoin is in alignment with those on the left and those that are part of the Democrat Party, because there just is a shared value among Americans. This is something that we should appreciate about America, is that we all have a lot of shared values, and the current dynamic that we live in is just very divisive. But Americans more often than not agree on a lot more than we disagree on. It's just this hyper-partisan, hyper-in-your-face social media political environment that we live in that really is drawing out the worst of everybody. I mean, what gets more clicks? Someone saying, great job, I agree with you, or someone throwing bombs at someone and, trying to get them off canter so that they can show that they shouldn't be the one that gets elected. I get it. We're in the middle of election season. It is partisan heaven, right? Because now is when being partisan is very much rewarded, not only by social media clicks, but theoretically, by winning the election itself. So, but I like to look for, I'm a very much someone who appreciates unity. And I am very much appreciating the unity that Bitcoin can deliver. I don't think that it's going to make us agree on everything moving forward, but ultimately it will bring our country together in a way that other technologies haven't. One of the most important ways that I think that it will bring us together is that if you look at some of the main problems with the political process right now, it is that there's just way too much money in Washington, D.C. There's way too much spending, partly by just the ability to raise the deficit, but also the debt limit, but also the ability to print money writ large. And so a lot of the companies, a lot of the special interest groups, a lot of the businesses, a lot of the international groups, they really want to get close to that money printer. They really want to get close to Washington, D.C. So they're spending more money than ever to be able to influence that political process. And that is actually what's causing some of the biggest divide problems in our country, because if the special interest groups and the high net worth individuals, which nothing against those groups, but they have a lot more resources, when they go in to influence the political process in their favor, because they have so much money and there's really sort of an unlimited money spending problem in Washington, D.C. today, then they're going to draw the political process towards themselves and away from the constituents which those elected officials represent. And so we have this really big disconnect now, I believe, in my opinion, between the constituencies and the actual elected officials themselves, because of this big money problem. And the way that we limit or reduce that problem is not to say you can't, right? Because water, it's just a lot. It's the problem with corruption in politics is almost like water going through rocks. Like, you can't really stop corruption. It will always find its way around. Now, listen, I'm favorable towards some types of policies to reduce corruption, but it's not the only tool that we should have in our toolbox. We also need to be looking for ways to reduce the incentive to corrupt. And the way that you reduce the incentive to corrupt in Washington, D.C. is to reduce the power of D.C. itself and reduce the power of the money printer. But listen, the federal government will always have so much power. Adding on the unlimited money printer with one of the most powerful currencies in human history is a godlike power that nobody really should be able to have unless there is some sort of check and balance like Bitcoin. And so I think that Bitcoin will ultimately result in a world where not only do we see both sides come together for an appreciation of the technology, but we'll also see a lot more of the elected officials in Washington, D.C. and across this country start to represent their constituents a little bit better. And I think that will also drive down a lot of this partisan divide that we see taking place across America.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you're basically saying that to some extent, broken money has led to this great divide between the left and the right, or it's like made it more extreme than it maybe would be without broken money?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. I believe that there is just so much incentive to go buy out Washington, D.C., and the power of money in the political process is something that I think a lot of Americans do appreciate, but they just don't see a way to fix that problem. In fact, back in the day, not so long ago, when Bernie Sanders was running, a lot of people were supporting him because he said, we need to get the money out of politics. The problem with saying, I want to get money out of politics, is you sort of had to stand on the ground of saying, well, I won't take the big money checks. I won't take the big super PAC checks, or I won't take the multinational checks. The problem is if you don't take those big checks, you lose. And so we really are in this bad situation where unless you get bought out, you really can't win these huge races anymore, especially the really sort of contentious ones, that being the presidential election and pretty much any of those swing states that the president relies on, or the future president relies on, to be able to hold his office, so his or her office. So yeah, I do believe money is a problem. I don't really see a way to fix it at writ large outside of creating a check and balance. And I believe that check and balance will be Bitcoin.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that makes perfect sense. I mean, if the federal government is spending trillions of dollars per year, that money is obviously going to businesses, individuals, contractors, employees. Like, that's a lot of money that people are going to, make decisions based off, continue to keep that money or trying to get more money. So obviously it plays a major role.
Well, think about it from a per dollar per congressman perspective. If you just break up the U.S. senators, there's 100 of them. If you're spending, I think I did the math one time and it was like $50 billion per senator is overseen. So it makes sense to spend, 10, 20, $30 million in a race to be able to flip the Senate and then be able to go in and influence where that money goes. The influence of where the money goes is why we see Washington, D.C. becoming a place where only the ultra wealthy and only the ultra influential people can go have an impact. And that disconnects lawmakers from their constituents. So yeah, like this has been a big problem for many years. Everybody knows it's a problem. I mean, we're record spending. And again, I'm not against spending on politics. I think there's a freedom of speech component there for sure. I just believe that the incentive to be involved in Washington, D.C. is so high that even some of the largest companies in the world are just spending crazy amounts of money on politics. And that includes really the crypto industry right now.
Yeah, it kind of ties back into maybe the recent ECB paper that was published. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that. I think part of it was basically saying that like they were suggesting that crypto and Bitcoin holders are like fairly wealthy and they're trying to like effectively lobby the government to like not ban it, not do stuff like that. What do you think about the paper in general?
I mean, the paper's filled with inaccuracies and misinformation. Certainly I can appreciate their point about, the crypto industry writ large spending a lot of money. They are spending a lot of money. I think we account for, if you include Bitcoin in that pocket, which I barely would with that spending, to be honest. I'm on the ground floor when it comes to political spending, and the vast majority of that spending is coming from crypto companies and crypto influencers, big time holders that are in the crypto space.
In this frontier moment, Dennis is talking about the European Central Bank's recent paper criticizing Bitcoin holders as wealthy individuals lobbying to protect their assets. But what's the real story behind this claim? Central banks like the ECB might view something like Bitcoin as a threat to their control over monetary policy. By labeling Bitcoiners as wealthy lobbyists, they try to undermine Bitcoin's legitimacy. However, Bitcoin's core strength lies in its inclusiveness. Anyone and everyone, regardless of background or wealth, can participate and secure their assets independently of central institutions. This is why Bitcoin continues to gain traction despite the narratives pushed by advisors at the ECB. And now back to Dennis.
I don't see very many Bitcoiners spending money on the political system, although they do contribute, they do participate. I think we're one of the few groups in the space at Satoshi Action that is very good at putting in the proof of work and getting Bitcoiners to contribute to our cause. But that being said, I mean, listen, Coinbase and Ripple account for, I think, $50 million each just to one super PAC. So it is a very much a crypto thing. So we in our paper, our rebuttal paper that we put together, myself, Alan Farrington, Dr. Murray Rudd, and Freddie New, we put together, sort of an argument for why we believe that they're wrong about Bitcoin. And we also do, in this case, create a little bit of a separation between Bitcoin and crypto. I think it's relevant for a lot of the arguments that they try to make, especially when it comes to financial inclusivity. Like they talk about financial inclusivity and Bitcoin is the most financially inclusive technology on the planet. Crypto is in another side. Maybe there's some that are more inclusive and others that are not. But for the most part, Bitcoin is just wholly separate on that conversation. I would say on the decentralization conversation as well. Like it's the same thing, right? Like you have Bitcoin, which is hyper decentralized. And then the next best thing is like distant second. And of course, there is a level of decentralization, but it just comes nowhere close to the decentralization that we experience with Bitcoin. So we go through that paper. We debunk every part of it as much as we possibly can. Very excited that we got Alan Farrington to join us on the rebuttal, and that we were able to lay out the case for why the ECB, which is clearly very biased. Of course, they're going to be wanting to push CBDCs, why they are very biased and why we believe they're wrong. The ultimate goal with that paper, though, isn't just to put it out there and say, hey, this is why they're wrong. It's also to create an opportunity for those that are reviewing their paper. So they submitted it to SSRN, right, which is like sort of like a place to post your working papers. You're still working on them. They're not a final product, or maybe they are, and you're just sort of like giving people an opportunity to take a look at it before you go to the actual academic journal, the peer-reviewed journal. So they are very likely already in the process of submitting or have submitted this paper for peer review. And so our goal was to get our rebuttal out there, bring a lot of attention to it, and then have the reviewers, or maybe even the editor or handling editor of the journal of which they are trying to get their paper published, to see our rebuttal and just be like, wow, like this, they just demolished these guys. I can't in good conscience accept this paper. I need to reject it because it's just been so clearly debunked by the folks on this other paper over here that was responding. So that's our real end goal, is to kill the ECB paper. I think it's a long shot, but given the hostile and aggressive nature of the paper from the ECB, we felt it was important to move as quickly as possible to get our response out there.
I like it. When, in your experience, when you're talking to both and right-wing politicians or people that are donating money, what success have you had on both sides? And like, are there different arguments that resonate with each side? And how do you think about like pitching Bitcoin effectively?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. There's different messages that resonate with different sides. With Democrats, you're going to talk about Bitcoin being, very inclusive and that it can't be used for discrimination. Cross-border payments, I think, also really important for folks on the left. And with Republicans and those on the right, it's going to be, small government, reducing the ability to debase the currency. Those are things that really, really resonate with Republicans. There's a number of other things as well. I think, just the right to like access the technology, self-custody, those types of things are critically important, I believe, more so to Republicans than Democrats. So when you get into a room, you really do need to like understand who you're in front of. Now, listen, the fun part is if I say that, Bitcoin protects us from currency devaluation, like that is not a big talking point for the left, but they care, right? Like they're aware of that. Especially I think in developing countries, I think that's where that story works even better. Like framing it in the mind of an American is different, but if you frame it in the mind of, someone who's living in a country where they really don't have access to any sort of technology or savings technology, then all of a sudden self-custody and currency debasement matter a lot more to someone on the left.
Do you think there are a lot of single issue voters out there that are basically like team Bitcoin? I don't care. I just want my rights for holding Bitcoin to be protected?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's clearly, the number of them, hard to say. But there's clearly a voter class out there that is voting and is engaging in this election process purely for the ability to be able to vote up and down the line on how someone views Bitcoin. And also really there's going to be a large, I think, crypto single issue voter contingency as well, which is, in this election, it's likely that those two groups will be on the same page. They may be on different pages in the future, but right now it seems like both seem to be on the same side. You have the crypto industry very much supporting anyone who says anything good about crypto. And for the most part, I think the Bitcoin, voter group is willing to vote in favor of someone who is positive towards the crypto industry writ large, because that is today much better than what we're seeing out of Washington, D.C. from the Biden administration. Now, in the future, when we all generally become more adopting and pro Bitcoin and pro crypto writ large, I think there will be Bitcoin voters who will say, you're not supporting Bitcoin enough. You're really just here for crypto. And then that's when you'll see, I think those groups tend to be on different sides. But I've always viewed the crypto vote writ large, including Bitcoin, very much like a political party. You have, even in the Democrats and in the Republicans, you have the same dynamic. With Democrats, you see progressives and liberals sometimes going after Democrats that they feel are too much on the right or too moderate. Same thing in the Republican Party. You have conservatives who will go after Republicans who they think are too moderate or too far on the left. And usually there's a term in both the Republican and Democrat Party for this. It's called a rhino and a dino, Republican in name only, Democrat in name only. And so that same thing will probably take place in the crypto space. You'll have the Bitcoiners will be like, listen, you're being really pro crypto, but you haven't done anything for Bitcoin. You're not focusing enough on the thing that truly matters. And that will create divisions as well within how they vote into the future.
How important is this presidential election for Bitcoin? Like, I think I've seen Larry Fink basically say, like, it doesn't matter who's the president for Bitcoin. Like, Bitcoin's probably going to do pretty well. What do you think about that?
So I think Larry Fink is correct, especially directionally. I believe that Bitcoin is going to go up regardless. But the caveat to that is I think that Bitcoin will go up quicker, faster under a Trump administration initially, especially because of the way he's talking about it, right? We don't really know what Trump would do if he were elected president and how his administration would be ran. We only are going based off of what they're saying and based off of the people that are getting close to him. So I generally do believe that it will be a better situation for Bitcoin writ large, but we don't really know for sure. But the market, I think, believes that Trump is going to win. And I think you'll see if a Trump win takes place, you'll see a faster, I think, more aggressive move upwards in the price, purely because investors will feel more confident. I think that's the one thing that gets missed here is that it's not. There's a lot of investors that sit on the sidelines on a lot of different investment opportunities, different asset classes, when there is a lack of clarity when they don't feel like they understand where things are going to go.
Secure your retirement with a Bitcoin IRA from Unchained. Right now, get started with no setup fees and enjoy your first year free. You can open a Roth and traditional Bitcoin IRA and even upgrade old forgotten 401ks and IRAs into tax-advantaged Bitcoin where you control the keys. Get started today at unchained.com/frontier. There's no better way to hold tax-advantaged Bitcoin for decades. That's unchained.com/frontier. And now back to the show.
And so I think under a Trump administration, it at least appears as if so that the GOP and Trump and the Republicans would at bare minimum, not attack Bitcoin, right? And that is a huge improvement over the Biden administration. But they may also pass favorable regulations. They may, or I wouldn't say favorable, but just create regulations, create rules of the road for the industry. And so that investors like that. So I think some people are putting some early bets in, assuming that that's going to happen. Now, if Harris wins, I don't think Bitcoin tanks and we go down and everything's, sort of a terrible environment for Bitcoin for the next 4 years. I just think that the move upward initially won't be as aggressive. Now, I can appreciate on the Harris campaign, I've talked to some folks that are close to the campaign and some folks that are, within the Democrat circles. And, they sort of view this as they want to slow it down. They want to say, hey, we really need to be thoughtful about these things because the way we design these regulations, especially if they stick and they're around for a long time, can have very serious long-term implications. I like to harken back to the 1996 Telecommunications Act, which I say re-regulated. People say deregulated. I don't even think that term is, it's really fair to use anymore these days. Everything just gets re-regulated. We don't eliminate regulations as much as we love to just reclassify things. So when that regulation or re-regulation occurred, all of a sudden, right after it happened, 1996 moving forward, we saw massive investments into the telecommunications space, particularly around wireless and broadband, not only on investment, but also deployment. And you can see it. It's like, if you look at any chart, it's like, what happened in 1996, right? Like, well, the Telecommunications Act of 1996 happened, and we got rid of some of the barriers that were in place in order to see wireless and broadband be truly successful in this country through re-regulation. And that led to us being dominant leaders on the technology for years to come. I would say SOPA and PIPA, same thing, like SOPA and PIPA not getting through bigly because of, I think, Senator Wyden. If you go back and look, Senator Wyden was a leader on this. He prevented these regulations, which would have hurt the internet industry. And so because of that, we saw us, again, become leaders on the internet. So in a way, regulations and how we craft regulations are super important. There's a balancing act. Typically you see Republicans be favorable towards less regulation and more just open markets, and then Democrats be more favorable towards more regulation and more consumer protections. But we really much need to meet in the middle. Like, you don't want to be extreme to one side or the other. No regulation, and you have, poison in your water, and you have lead in your paint, and, the ozone is gone because we never got rid of CFCs. And then on the other side, if you overregulate, we turn into Europe, and we don't have any innovations taking place in America, and they're being distributed across the world. So we need to meet in the middle, and that is a thoughtful process. And this is why I really want to see more Bitcoiners get involved in politics and actually get involved in the policy-making process, because I've never met a more thoughtful, more long-term minded, more creative group of people, very intelligent, always thinking about the future and how incentives work. And regulations really are just designing incentives, either positive or negative incentives, to guide people a certain direction. And Bitcoiners are some of the best at that. I mean, listen, I've never met anyone outside the Bitcoin space who even competes when it comes to thinking deeply about how incentives can be aligned and how we can all head the right direction. So I've been saying for the last few months now, I've really started to get loud on this, and gonna get even louder, is we really need Bitcoiners to be like designing policy so that we can have regulations that actually make sense for this country.
That makes a lot of sense. Can you kind of maybe elaborate on some of the example policies that people should be, supporting in regards to Bitcoin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we want to see a lot of different things take place. But I think one that we can all agree on, well, most people can agree on, I think, in this space, is some type of proof of reserves policy. I think it only makes sense that all of these providers that do hold on to Bitcoin for people, that they prove, verifiably that they have the Bitcoin, that they're holding it, and that it's in reserves and that they share that information publicly. I think that's really great for investor confidence. I think that's really great for consumer protection. And ultimately, that protects innovation, because what happens when we have FTX and SBF types of situations is we see a huge reduction in investment and ultimately a huge reduction in innovation. And so by protecting consumers and by protecting markets from people like SBF and what they did with FTX, we are able to protect innovation now and into the future. And so that is a policy that I think is just really makes a lot of sense. I don't want to go too far outside of what I think makes sense today, because I think we're still in this mode of like, are we going to do Bitcoin or not? And once we get to that point of where we all agree, we can have these collective debates, and we should have them very thoughtful, very rigorous debates on how we want to see regulations or lack thereof take place for the Bitcoin industry writ large, so that we can protect consumers, encourage innovation, and also encourage investors to operate in the space without fearing whether the market is going to fall out beneath them the next day.
Yeah. Do you happen to have an update on Trump and Senator Lummis's Bitcoin stockpile plan? I know that was pitched in Nashville earlier this year. Did anything happen after she introduced it? Is it required that basically like Trump would get elected for it to ever really move forward? Do you have an update for us?
I mean, yeah, listen, it's hard to know. It's the fog of war when you're in the middle of these elections. I will say that it certainly would help the ability for the United States to pass a bill like that into law to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve. It would certainly help, I think, to have a friendly administration. That's probably the one bill that I think, really would benefit from a full, red sweep, so to speak. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible with if outside of that environment. I think it's just much more likely, especially given that Trump has already endorsed the policy, and it's a bill that is crafted by Republicans. Now, when it comes to the strategic reserve, I think we're still a ways out. Even if we get a red sweep, it's still a long shot. So for us at Satoshi Action, we're really focused on how do we create momentum behind this idea that we support and that we want to see become a reality for our country. The way that we believe that we can be effective for that is to go state by state and start getting states to begin the process of adding Bitcoin to the balance sheet. And we are already in that process. We already have a crafted model policy, which that might be a little bit of breaking news for you guys there. I mean, I'm sure people are probably thinking we were going to do this, but we want to see states to follow in the line of where me and you are as individuals and add Bitcoin to the balance sheet. And then once we have enough states and a lot of momentum around this idea, I think it really creates a lot of clarity that it's an idea that people want and that it works. And then the federal government can follow in the footsteps of the states.
In this frontier moment, Dennis is talking about Satoshi Action Fund's strategy for passing Bitcoin-friendly policies at the state level. Why start at the state level? Well, many influential U.S. policies began as state-level initiatives before scaling nationwide. By getting states to adopt pro-Bitcoin measures like the right to mine or self-custody, Dennis and his team aim to build a grassroots movement that sets the blueprint for future federal action. The idea is simple. Once enough states prove the value and stability of these policies, it will create momentum, making it easier for other states, as well as federal lawmakers, to follow suit and adopt similar measures. And now back to Dennis.
We have seen the federal government follow in the footsteps of the states many times throughout history, and we will see it take place again with Bitcoin. And that's why we at Satoshi Action, especially when we launched, we were so fixated on doing something at the state level, because we knew that there could be, no matter what happened in Washington, D.C., whether good or bad, that we could be on the cutting edge of policy innovation. That's why we worked really hard to pass things like the right to mine, the right to self-custody, the right to run a node, the right to peer-to-peer transactions, and more into law in 4 different states, because we want that momentum to be carried forward into the federal level. We don't just see ourselves as the states are the end game. We see the states as the first mover, and that the federal government will follow.
I like that. How do you see Bitcoin influencing future elections? I think we mentioned there's this growing, very small probably, but growing subset of the population that is basically a single issue voter for Bitcoin. That group is probably going to grow exponentially. At least that's what I would expect to potentially happen. How will that change elections in the future, or do you disagree with that framing?
The way that it could change elections moving forward in the future is not really a question should be asked. We should ask, how is it influencing elections right now? I mean, it's because it already is. If you just take Ohio as an example, you have, Senator Sherrod Brown running against Bernie Moreno. And the reason why Bernie Moreno has, not to take any sort of autonomy away from him or credit from him, but really one of the main reasons why he has been put in a position to be successful is because of this really strong urge to get to get Senator Brown out, because he's so in alignment with Elizabeth Warren. I don't think we can get Elizabeth Warren out. I love Deaton. I think the idea of running against her, and he's pro Bitcoin, and my hat's off to him. And maybe something wild happens and he wins that election, but that's just not the weak spot. Like in elections and in the political process, you always want to pursue achievable victory. You shoot for the moon when you can, right? Like recently, we got a peer-reviewed paper. We got a top 2% journal, but generally we're shooting a little lower, and occasionally we shoot up and try to go for a higher journal. You want to maintain most of your efforts around achievable victories, because if you're constantly shooting for the moon, it's like going out. I don't know if you ever played baseball, Joe, or your audience plays baseball, but it's like going out and swinging for a home run every time, no matter what. Like you're going to strike out like way, way, way more than if you're more selective about when you decide to swing for the home run. And that's how we view policy. We want to get the bases loaded, and then we want to swing for a home run and get a grand slam, because we want to also ensure that we're putting our resources in a position where we're deploying our resources so that we get these wins and that we build the momentum and we can move up from there. So I think right now that Senate race is very tight, and I think Bernie Moreno may have just pulled ahead in the polls, and then Trump is way up in that state. And I think the thing that is going to set it over the edge is really going to be those crypto and those Bitcoin voters that are highly, highly incentivized to go in and make sure that this victory is achieved. And in these swing states, Ohio is one of the past. I mean, it's pretty heavily in Trump's camp right now. But in these swing states, 5,000, 10,000 voters can make all the difference in the world. We saw during the presidential elections of the past where these have come down to like handfuls of votes in one state. So that happened during the George W. Bush election in Florida, right? There was that huge Supreme Court, thing that was fought over the whole thing down there. So needless to say, small amount of voters can make a huge difference, especially in these swing states. And we don't need 1 million votes for Bitcoin to be able to win critical elections. We just need enough voters in the right place, in the right time, with the right amount of resources to pull off these victories. And I think this will be the real first election where we get to see how effective we're being at elections. I'm really curious come November 5th to see how it all turns out, because there's so many things, there's so many data points we're going to collect, and so many realizations we're going to have. Did it work? How much? If it did work, how well did it work? And what can we learn from this lesson? And this is just the beginning for Bitcoin voters across the United States and really the world to see how influential we can be in these elections.
Yeah, those are definitely some great points. What are your thoughts generally around the prediction markets? It seems like this cycle, a lot of people are not just paying attention to like general polls, but they're looking at prediction markets and people betting on the election. Which do you think might be more reliable, and like how do you think about those new prediction markets?
Prediction markets are very much prediction markets, right? And I think prediction markets were way off when Hillary Clinton was running. So I would say that they can be just as much, if not more off than the polls can be. So I would certainly take them with a grain of salt. Now, this prediction market requires that you put up capital. So that's a little bit different. And I'm very curious to see how it plays out. But something people also should realize about the prediction markets, especially poly market, it's not that they're wrong. I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm just saying it's something to keep in mind. And that's that, predominantly young men, men and young men like to gamble. And predominantly young men are supportive of Trump. And so I think that, at the end of the day, like the algorithm, when you're a young man or a man, you're getting fed things that are going to make you really believe that Trump is going to win. But the same thing is happening on the left, but they don't tend to participate in these markets at the degree that young men do. And again, young men, the demographic is very much, I think, onto the Trump camp. So that's my opinion. Someone has said, well, the markets would take that into consideration. I really don't know. It's so early. This is the first time I've really seen this product be used for a presidential campaign. I am very curious, again, with the polls, with the Bitcoin single issue voters. I'm really curious to see how all the data points come out, because that's going to tell us a lot. And it's going to tell us, whether polls should be ignored and whether Polymarket's more accurate, or how impactful the Bitcoin single issue voter was, or was it really the crypto single issue voter that was more impactful? And how do those things move carrying forward?
This is kind of a more theoretical, funny but futuristic question. The strategic Bitcoin stockpile does eventually get passed one day, whether it's President Harris that passes it or President Trump that passes it or a future president beyond that. How would you advise the United States to actually hold Bitcoin? Would it be like some sort of geographically distributed multi-sig setup, or if the sitting president asks you, Dennis Porter, how should we securely hold, hundreds of thousands or million plus Bitcoin? What would you say?
I love the idea of the keys. They have the nuclear football, right? Where how you decide to launch the or have the codes and have the launch for the nukes. Like it's same thing with the Bitcoin, right? It's like, well, if you really want to be able to access it, you got to have the president's key and like the Speaker of the House's key or something like that. And then you have to have the codes in place to be able to actually access the Bitcoin. I don't really know. Like today, the president can pull the oil out of the strategic reserve to be able to use it when and where he deems fit or necessary. People will probably think that's a great, that's a good model. I tend to think that, oil is it is a commodity as well as Bitcoin in that sense, but there's more oil that you can get, right? You can refill that oil reserve pretty quickly. You sell 100,000 Bitcoin today, 10 years from now, you might not be able to get 100,000 Bitcoin back, and certainly not at the same price. So I would probably want to see a much more rigorous protection around the usage of Bitcoin and whether or not someone can actually push the Bitcoin out into the marketplace. But yeah, TBD on that one. We need the Bitcoiners to think very thoughtfully about how to design that policy.
Yeah, it's fair. I guess we would need a lot of checks and balances before spending from that wallet.
That's right.
Do you think that elections historically have played a role in Bitcoin cycles? Like some people speculate that, halvings drive the cycle. Some people speculate that liquidity or just like macro cycles in general. Is it possible that presidential elections drive Bitcoin cycles at all?
I think that, that's a great question. And, it's possible that moving forward, we could see a little bit more impact on Bitcoin because of the election, especially if let's say theoretically, you have a very, 4 years from now, a very pro-Bitcoin candidate and a very anti-Bitcoin candidate. And then, the pro-Bitcoin candidate pushes out to the lead. You're going to see, I think, markets react and want to see, and you'll see Bitcoin react to that. The same is true on the opposite side of the coin, right? Like if you have this just very hostile administration that wants to come in and be anti-Bitcoin, then you could see the price of Bitcoin, be more muted. I don't think that, one president can really ever make that big of a difference where you're going to see Bitcoin just like tank to the zero or anything or tank to 1,000. I don't think we're obviously never going to zero, but it's a good thought experiment. I would say there's also the idea of if someone's running for office and they want to get reelected, let's say Harris wins and she wants to get reelected and she's like, let's just run this economy super hot. Let's get the money printer going. And that could drive the price of Bitcoin up because she wants to get reelected because she wants to see numbers be looking good when she goes to the polls. And that's like a tactic that people have assumed that both sides of the aisle have used as they go to pursue reelection for some time now. I mean, definitely if you want to get reelected, you want to see the markets doing well, because when markets are doing well, then people are going to want to keep you in office. So certainly it's a good thought experiment to believe that, if you want to, if that presidential elections could influence the price of Bitcoin because someone might want to pump those numbers in order to get back into office. So I hadn't thought about it before, but yeah, usually I thought about it the other way around, like the halving and the price of Bitcoin going up would influence the elections themselves and how those candidates see Bitcoin, because I think it was smart of Satoshi to time it that way. Like the halving is 6 months before the election or 5 months before the election. And then that's going to be a natural catalyst to Bitcoin going up, so that when the election comes around, it's like, oh, wow, we can't really it's primary language. We can't shit on Bitcoin here. Like the Bitcoin's doing well. And everyone's feeling good. Everyone has extra money to spend on the election. So I generally viewed that it was really smart of Satoshi. I don't know if he did it on purpose or not, to time the upward swings of Bitcoin with the presidential election, so that whoever's running for office, they don't have an easy way to target Bitcoin. Like if FTX was collapsing right now, it'd be really easy for someone to come out and be like, yeah, that Bitcoin thing seems like a scam to me. Look at how bad it's doing. So that's been my perspective. But we could see that flip in some ways as well, where the presidential election itself is actually impacting the price of Bitcoin because of the need or desire to want to see it go up so that you can get that Bitcoin vote.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's fun to think about. When it comes to states adopting Bitcoin and Bitcoin-friendly policy, are you working on anything to like templatize things, kind of like Saylor has done? Like he kind of creates like an outline or a website for other corporations to adopt Bitcoin as their treasury reserve asset. Like, are you making it easier for different states to kind of do the same policies that protect the rights of Bitcoiners?
Absolutely. We created that template in June of 2022 when we launched Satoshi Action Fund, and we have successfully introduced that template in over 20, well, I should say that specific piece of policy in 16 states. Our policies have been in over 20 states. Some of them are different, but the one that protects rights, we've seen that in 16 states now. And, it's a template, right? And the great part about having a template is that when you pass it into law, other people want to copy it. And so far, just after our first year of passing it in Arkansas and Montana, we had other states that just started to introduce it without us at all. So Idaho is a really good example. Idaho Freedom Foundation. There's a gentleman over there named Nicholas. He's really pro Bitcoin, and he saw this bill and just was like, "Yeah, let's take some of that and let's introduce it in Idaho." And he did that completely on his own without any sort of outreach to us or us reaching out to him. Obviously, when we saw the bill get introduced, because we have software that tracks these things, we reached out. We said, we were like, "Wow, this bill's got it. How did this happen?" Like it just sort of manifested out of nowhere. And so we reached out and we did a lot of good work, and we were able to make some great progress there in the state of Idaho. We didn't get it passed or across the finish line, but we'll be back. Usually these are roughly about a 2-year process when we do them. So we'll be back in 2025 to get it across the finish line. But we also saw it happen in New Hampshire as well. The funny part is we work really closely with a lawmaker in New Hampshire, Representative Keith Ammon, great pro-Bitcoin guy. He actually introduced the first piece of Satoshi Action Model policy ever. He was the very first lawmaker that ever did it. And so that's why we gave him the Lawmaker of the Year award in our dinner a couple years ago. A different lawmaker that wasn't talking to him, wasn't talking to us, saw some of the stuff that we were doing and introduced that language there in the state of New Hampshire. So yes, there is a template. We encourage people to go to the website, satoshiaction.io. We publicly display all of our policy. We'll be doing a refresh soon, but you can use what's up there right now. If you go to the Bitcoin rights section, you can see the self-custody protections, everything else there, right to mine, and you can use that language. And we encourage people to do it. We encourage lawmakers to do it. We encourage individuals to go and share that policy with their lawmakers. We also have one-pagers on there, which all need a refresh, but because it changes every year. But people can use it right now, and it's an effective tool for getting in front of lawmakers. We very much believe in creating the blueprint for the United States at the state level. That is actually a fear that we had on the opposite side of the aisle, or the opposite side of the issue, I should say, where we started to see anti-Bitcoin policies get passed into law, particularly in the state of New York. The moratorium on Bitcoin mining there, we were really fearful that would get spread across the country. And so we said, you know what, we need to go on offense right now, and we need to start creating policies for our side so that we can set the blueprint, the template, as you call it, and start passing these things across the country, and that can be done with or without our help.
I love it. It's awesome to hear. Last question, we can start to close it out. Maybe you can answer this in regards to politics or legislation, or you can take it however you wish. What do you think is the biggest risk to Bitcoin?
I always tell people the biggest risk that could completely destroy Bitcoin is if the earth were to fall into the sun and none of us exist anymore. It's a very big risk. It's going to happen one day. So you got to watch out for that one.
It's fair. That would be pretty bad for a lot of things. Dennis, thanks so much for taking the time to record. This was awesome. Any final thoughts?
Listen, it's a private vote for a reason. If you don't feel comfortable sharing your vote, you don't have to. Vote your conscience. If you're a single issue voter, vote for your issue, and just make sure you vote, right? Like, I think it's important that Americans get into the habit of voting, especially this Bitcoin group that we have, these single issue voters. You really need to build up that muscle memory. Make sure you're registered to vote and vote. I mean, obviously this is going to come out right. It's coming out right before the election. So you probably lost your chance if you aren't registered yet. Make sure to get your ballots in though, and vote for the candidate that you believe is going to do the most for the issues that you care the most about.
Awesome. Thanks, Dennis. This was great.